In this session, we will understand the biological importance of proteins in brief. Now, as we already studied in our previous sessions, there are so many proteins which exist in the nature, both in plants and animals and in microorganisms. And the proteins which are found in the body of either plant or animal or microorganism, every protein has one or the other function. So you can say there is no protein which exists without a function. They are there because they have a function. They have a particular function. So therefore, you can think of a function, one or the other function for every existing protein molecule in the nature. Now, uh, so all those functions are actually the biological, they make up the biological importance of proteins. But here we will just glance in general about some important biological activities or biological functions of proteins. Now, proteins, of course, they are made up of molecules of amino acids, and they play a very important role in almost all biological processes because there is one group of proteins called enzymes which are essential, without which you cannot think of any biological process, biochemical reactions, metabolic activities. So you can say every metabolic activity occurring in a living cell involves one or the other proteins. And proteins catalyze reactions in our bodies. Now, there are some protein molecules which are involved in transportation of uh, gases, nutrients, etc. So, for example, hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin is associated with transportation of oxygen. In the same way, there are some other proteins which are associated with transportation of many other chemicals. They may be nutrients, they may be products of a cell, etc. And proteins in general keep us healthy because they are part of our immune system. For example, our immune system reacts to the infection by the production of antibodies. Now, these antibodies are nothing but immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins are a type of proteins. So, proteins are involved in health also. That means they are the ones which fight against infection. Whenever we suffer from infection, whenever there is a disease in the body, so that is taken care by the immune system through the mediation of proteins which are part of the immune system. And there is another category of proteins called hormones, which are commonly called chemical messengers. And these chemical messengers, they actually transmit message from cell to cell. And as I already told you, enzymes. Now, enzymes, you remember, is a category of proteins. Uh, these enzymes catalyze the chemical reactions. Now, remember, every cell performs so many different types of biochemical reactions. Now, these biochemical reactions must occur in a body temperature environment. Now, that is the limitation of the biochemical reactions which happen inside the cell or inside the body. Now, the biochemical reactions must happen in a very rapid speed, and the biochemical reactions must happen in a low temperature, I mean at optimum body temperature. Now, that is achieved by these enzymes. Of course, without enzymes the chemical reactions may happen, but the speed is so low that it is of no use for the biological functioning. Whereas in the presence of enzyme, the rate of reaction is very high, and it is possible for the reaction to occur in lower temperature, which is equal to the body temperature. So next, I already mentioned antibodies, which are nothing but immunoglobulins, which are produced by the immune system against the infection. Then another kind of proteins are the proteins which are associated with DNA molecule. Maybe you are aware about the histone proteins. Now, DNA is the genetic material, which is very important because it carries all the information for all the activities of the body. You call it as the genetic material because it is having genes, and that DNA molecule is actually packed in the form of a chromosome. Now, this packing takes the help of the DNA associated proteins, and the DNA associated proteins are histone proteins. So, like this, proteins are also involved in the DNA package or chromosomes. We commonly call the chromosomes as nucleoproteins because it is a combination of nucleic acid and proteins. Now, another category of proteins which is of very much importance is contractile proteins. Now, we know the movement of the body, the locomotion of the body of any animal is mainly due to the muscular tissue. Now, the muscular tissue is the one which is capable of contraction and relaxation. Now, this contraction and relaxation property is mainly due to a special type of protein or the special type of protein molecules called contractile proteins like actin, myosin, troponin, tropomyosin, etc. Now, without these contractile proteins, you cannot think of contraction and relaxation. Now, without contraction and relaxation of muscles, there is no possibility of locomotion. There is no possibility of body movements either inside the body. For example, the smooth muscles, which are responsible for the uh, uh, movement in the alimentary canal and some other parts of the body, and the beating of the heart, which is carried out by the cardiac muscles, or the skeletal muscles which help the movement of the body. So everything, all these kinds of movement is due to the contractile proteins. Then we have structural proteins which are building blocks of the body. So the tissues, every kind of tissue needs one or the other type of protein. So proteins are the ones which are required for the tissue growth. So the body is mainly made up of protein. Then I already mentioned about the messengers, of which are called hormones. Of course, we have steroid hormones and protein hormones. Steroid hormones are lipid in nature, whereas the peptide hormones, which are made up of protein molecules. Many hormones are proteinaceous in nature, and they play a very important role in the normal functioning of the body by transporting message from gland to the target cells. Now, transport proteins. This is another kind of proteins. Now, transport proteins are involved in the transportation of gases and nutrients. As I already mentioned, you just think of hemoglobin and other pigments, right? Which transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. In the same way, there are so many proteins which are involved in the transportation of different kinds of molecules which are involved in different functions within the cell or in the body. And one more thing is we come across pigments. Here I didn't mention it. Pigments, many pigments, almost all pigments are protein in nature. Pigments are responsible for the coloration. For example, hemoglobin is responsible for the red color. Then there is a pigment rhodopsin which is present in the eye, which is involved in the vision. So like this, we can go on listing melanin, which is responsible for the skin coloration. And when it comes to the plants, all the colorations you see in the flowers are mainly due to the pigments. Okay, the chloroplast, which consists of chlorophyll pigment. Chlorophyll is a protein, and chlorophyll is involved in photosynthesis, and chlorophyll is responsible for the green coloration. Okay, in the same way, there are many pigments which are responsible for the flower coloration, and many pigments found in the animal body like hemoglobin, chlorine, like that. So they have different functions. Okay, now generally, proteins are required for normal growth and maintenance of the body. So, during the early stages of life, protein is required for growth, and later, not only later, throughout the life, the old tissues are worn out, old cells are worn out, and new cells has to be produced. So all these things require the continuous supply of protein in the form of amino acids. And so in general, I can say proteins are involved in many biochemical reactions, and proteins are involved in messenger. They act as messengers. So they provide structure. And one more function you can mention about proteins is, in many parts of the body, proteins are involved in maintenance of proper pH value. For example, our mouth cavity has alkaline pH, whereas our stomach has uh, acidic pH. So like this. So different parts of the body has to have different pH levels for the normal function. So that is taken care by some protein molecules. And body fluid balancing, or you can say osmoregulation in the body, is mainly taken care by the proteins. For example, how much amount of water has to be retained and how much amount of water has to be released. So osmoregulation is also taken care by the proteins. And then uh, so these are some of the we just discussed in general about the proteins and their importance in the living system. So these are some of the references for further reading. The students can refer these textbooks for detailed information.